All right, good morning, St. Matthew's. What I'm about to deliver is a repeat of the same stewardship reflection that I did on October 11th. So there were some mechanical sound problems back then that made it difficult to hear. But if you heard it successfully that time, there's no need to listen again. But for those who didn't, here's take two. Good morning, St. Matthew's. I miss seeing you all here, and it's nice to be back inside our beautiful sanctuary and to actually get dressed for church again. A few weeks ago, I asked Father Eric what it would take to get me here back in a live service, and he told me that it's nearly impossible to do, but there are 4 ways. I could play the organ, I could sing, I could hold a camera, or I could preach. So I said, let me preach. The topic this morning is stewardship, and so I'm going to reflect on my own faith journey that led me here to St. Matthew's in 2018. And then, with the zealotry of a new member, I'm going to share my thoughts about stewardship. I was baptized and raised a Lutheran in suburban New York. It was a congregation of mostly German and Scandinavian families. Many of the men had fought in World War II, and we seemed to have a lot of engineers in the congregation, some of whom did really interesting work like the lunar landing module at Grumman Aerospace. My family was very intimately involved in this congregation. I was in the church's preschool. I went to Sunday school and confirmation there. I was in the Boy Scout troop and the youth group. I played my trumpet with its choir. Our family's social life was largely based on friendships from that congregation. My mother was on Altar Guild for as long as I can remember. My father was on church council. In the recessions of the late 1970s, I recall the minister bringing bags of groceries to the house when my father was laid off from work. In December of 2007, when my father passed away, the minister was among the first 3 phone calls I made, and he and his wife promptly came and gathered at the house with us, even though it was in the middle of the night. It was that kind of relationship between a family and its church. Growing up as a Lutheran, I was a rare Protestant in a neighborhood where Catholics and Jews both outnumbered Protestants. I didn't know any Episcopalians back then, and in fact, the first time I encountered the word Episcopalian, I mispronounced it. Episcolopian, I said. It was in an 8th grade English class, and I was reading aloud by a work from Nathaniel Hawthorne. The next time I encountered the Episcopal Church, I was in college. I had a good friend and fraternity brother named Andy Martin, whose father was an Episcopal priest in Amesbury, Massachusetts, and a bunch of us would occasionally drive there on fall weekends to get away to their beautiful farmhouse. They were a delightful family. Andy's mom was an art teacher at Phillips Exeter Academy, and their uncle Ted was Ted Sorensen, the Kennedy confidant. At this point in my life, the faith of my Lutheran childhood was complicated by various scientific knowledges I'd picked up in college, and I'd become less automatically faithful and more questioning. I wasn't specifically rebellious, nor had I become agnostic, but I had a head filled with some science-based alternatives to the things that I had once accepted on faith. I would debate these ideas with Father Martin during these Amesbury weekends. In principle, I could have equally well argued them with my Lutheran minister back home, but that would have seemed unseemly to argue faith with the minister who'd guided and informed my faith during childhood. So Father Martin was a comparatively safe and neutral outlet for me. And he was completely tolerant and patient, and he introduced me to the Episcopal Church's confidence in reason and argumentation. Ironically, my friend Andy married shortly after graduation, and he asked me to be godfather to his first daughter. So apparently my faith arguments with his father, the Episcopal priest, didn't dissuade him from making me his daughter's spiritual guardian. After college, I started a career in Cincinnati, and like most single men in their 20s, church wasn't a high priority, but at 27, I was engaged, and my Catholic fiancé and I sought out a church. Based on my fond recollections of my debates with Father Martin, and based on the middle ground that the Episcopal Church represented between my faith and my fiancé's, we chose the Episcopal Church and settled into the lovely Calvary Episcopal congregation in Clifton. Calvary is a church and a congregation much like St. Matthew's, and you'd all be rather comfortable there. It's a late 19th century church of solid stone with a magnificent organ and a lovely congregation. At Calvary Episcopal, we married, we had our boys baptized there, and we settled into a lovely relationship with the church. 7 years later, however, work moved us to Weston, Florida. That city had no Episcopal congregation, so we settled on a nearby Lutheran church that we attended occasionally and half-heartedly. It did, however, result in one of the funniest stories about my middle son, John. We were a family of 4 at that time, and we went to church service with the boys, who were roughly 8 and 4 years old then. As we went to the altar for communion, even though all are welcome, I was thinking of my own upbringing where only confirmands could receive the communion, based on the idea that one ought to have an adult comprehension of the symbolism of communion before one partakes. So at the altar, I signaled to the minister to give communion to my oldest son, Alex, but just to give a blessing to my 4-year-old son, John. For the remainder of the service, John, the one who hadn't received communion, sort of glowered at me, and then once we left the service, he immediately turned to me and asked, "Why did Alex get bubblegum and beer and I didn't?" And I told him, "You answered your own question." Our next stop as a family was California in 2007, and we were initially so busy with work and with 3 boys in 3 schools that we didn't even try to find a church. We'd attend services occasionally on the holidays, but with no regularity. I was beginning to notice, though, that at these services, and especially when singing favorite hymns, that I'd get a bit choked up, a bit verklempt, to borrow a Yiddish word. It was something I couldn't explain, and it was an entirely new sensation to me. I once asked a minister about it, and he said, "Did you ever consider that that's God trying to signal you? After all, he's not going to part the Red Sea for you to get your attention. This might be all you get." I considered that, but God's signal still wasn't quite sufficient to get me back to church. It was a memorial service in 2018 that did. A fantastic 24-year-old boy named Scott Kleckner that we knew from school and from Boy Scouts had died suddenly from the flu, and I was at his services with my oldest son. It was one of those moments in life that make you contemplate pain and what you and your children can and cannot endure, and what you would need alongside of you to survive life's tragedies and to celebrate life's joys. It left me feeling terribly negligent that I'd neglected to find a church home for myself and for the boys in California. And a few months later, in August of 2018, I found and attended my first service at St. Matthew's. At the outset of this reflection, I joked that Father Eric got me here to preach so that I could finally get to a live service after 7 months away, but that was a joke, of course. And what truly got me here is I volunteered to reflect here in order to share my thoughts with you about St. Matthew's and to express my gratitude to you for welcoming me and my sons here so beautifully. I have many stories to share about the welcoming that I received here, but for the sake of time, I'll share just one. At Christmas in 2018, I'd been here at St. Matthew's just a few months, coming alone almost every Sunday, but I'd gotten to know some of you by then. It's a gradual process, getting to know a congregation. It takes patience and it takes work, but it happens at its own pace. Among the people I'd met were Tom and Lisa Stevenson at the 2018 gala. And the Sunday before Christmas, I mentioned to Tom and Lisa that my 3 sons would be joining me at St. Matthew's for the first time at our Christmas Eve service. Tom said to me, "What are their names? I want to know their names so that I can make them feel welcome." And I thought it was preposterous that he could remember their names, because I'm terrible at names, but I was touched by it because I wanted them to feel welcome here and I wanted them to enjoy it as much as I do. So I told Tom their names. They're Alex, John, and Christian. And after Christmas Eve, sure enough, Tom and Lisa came over and introduced themselves to my boys by name and welcomed them. What Tom and Lisa did for me that Christmas Eve was both a moment of grace and a master class on how to make people feel welcome here. The next day, the boys told me that going to St. Matthew's was the highlight of Christmas for them. So mission accomplished. I had found a church home for myself and for my sons, just as I'd committed to do at Scott Kleckner's funeral. And with that, I'll wrap up with some thoughts on stewardship. I take the word stewardship both seriously and literally. A steward is someone who preserves and defends something until it can be passed on to a new steward. As the present-day stewards of St. Matthew's, it's our obligation to see it safely and healthily to the next generation, just as the previous generations have done for us. We want it here forever, to welcome our children and their children, if we're so fortunate, and also to welcome newcomers like myself who have a yearning to be here. In my mind, there are 3 things that we need to do to properly steward this church. The first is to maintain our size. We want to be healthy in size, not just for size's sake, but because there's a lot of work to go around. There's a congregation to nurture, a school and a Sunday school to run, an altar to decorate, coffee hours to enjoy, a thrift shop, a magnificent music program. There's home and hope and laundry love and many, many more things that I don't even know yet. We need enough people to share that burden without exhausting them or discouraging them. Plus, it's just lovelier to hear 100 voices in the pews. Second, we need to avoid rifts, divisions, schisms, and scandals. There's so much controversy and division in the world, and we mustn't allow those into our sanctuary. We're well and wisely led in that regard, but we always have to be vigilant to prevent it. And third, we need to write checks. We all know it, and we all do it, and happily, check writing is one of life's simplest exercises, so write checks we will. I hope and expect that the COVID era hasn't made any of us feel detached and separated from St. Matthew's, but rather has made us treasure it all the more for its preciousness to us. And that, my friends, is my message of this morning. These are my reflections on my faith journey, my affection for St. Matthew's, and our role as stewards in keeping it strong. I miss you all, send out my affection and gratitude, and God bless.
Amen.
Amen.